Revelation chapter 7, verses 9 and 10. After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude, that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. And they cried out in a loud voice, Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb.
Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. For I proclaim the name of the Lord. Ascribe greatness to our God. For he is a rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice. A God of truth and without injustice, righteous and upright is he. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. For I proclaim the name of the Lord. Ascribe greatness to our God. For he is the rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice. A God of truth and without injustice, righteous and upright is he.
I want to start by giving you just a little bit of a mystery today, because Revelation chapter 7, verses 4 through 8 has been a little bit of a mystery to me. Because as you look at it, in verse 4 it says that then I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. But then as you look at this list, you see that that list doesn't actually match up with any of the lists that we find of the different tribes in Israel. The reason is that Joseph is listed almost there at the very end, but then also his son Manasseh was listed. Now, technically, Joseph didn't have his own tribe, his sons had him. So you have Ephraim and you have Manasseh. But Ephraim is not listed. And Dan is also not listed in this list. Why would Dan and Ephraim, as far as tribes go, why would they not be listed in this list here if it's all the tribes of Israel? Well, I don't have a total answer, just a complete answer, but I do have part of it. And part of it goes back to an old story. Let's take a look at it together. This story that we're going to look at, it has to do with a nation that is divided. Now, that nation did not start off divided, and that nation that we're talking about is the nation of Israel. That nation started off being a wonderful nation in many ways. And what has happened, and where we're looking at it in the story, is you've just had King David, followed by King Solomon. This was a wonderful time. Solomon is the one that built the temple. Solomon is the one who built up Jerusalem, built up Israel. But after Solomon, we see that the nation is divided in a not so good way at all. Now, as the name would suggest, because it's divided, it's going to have two kings, not just one. And this is the story of how Israel ended up getting two kings. In 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 1 through 5, this is what we read. Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone there to make him king. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon, he returned from Egypt. So they sent for Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and a heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Rehoboam answered, Go away for 3 days and then come back to me. So the people went away. So here we start to see this story unfold. We're introduced to Rehoboam. And Rehoboam, he is the real king. He is the one who is the son of Solomon. He is the one who's supposed to sit on the throne. And they come and they want to make him king. And that's going to happen. But now there's someone else in the mix. Verse 3 tells us about this Jeroboam character, who you get a little bit of information about him in verse 2, but you can read his story in the previous chapter and a few other chapters as well. But Jeroboam, he's not the rightful king, but he's going to form some opposition to Rehoboam, the real king. So during this 3 days that Rehoboam is wanting the people to go away and then come back later. During that 3 days, he is getting advice from people. He starts by getting advice from the elders. He asks them what they should do because they're asking him to make it a little bit lighter on them. Apparently, it was a pretty heavy yoke that was put on them by verse 4 from Solomon. And they're just asking for things to be eased up, for their load to be lightened. And he asks the elders what they should do. And the elders give their input. But then he doesn't exactly like what the elders say, so then he goes to his own peers, his own people who are about the same age as him and who serve him. Yes, they're going to give him very accurate advice, right? Well, at least that's what he thought, maybe. He at least wanted to hear what they had to say, and he liked what they had to say. However, who should he have actually listened to? Verses 12 through 14. 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam. As the king had said, "Come back to me in 3 days." The king answered the people harshly. Rejecting the advice given him by the elders, he followed the advice of the young men and said, "My father made your yoke heavy, I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions." He followed the advice of the young men. He followed the advice of the peers that he had. It wasn't good. They wanted him to appear like he was strong. And that's what, he wanted to do too. He wanted to appear like he was strong. Not going to be some weak person who just gives in to whatever. But that wasn't really what he was supposed to be focused on. The elders were giving him this good advice about, paying attention to what the people are asking and, actually listening to them. But he doesn't listen to the people. He doesn't listen to the elders. He listens to these young men. How is the nation going to respond? Verse 16 tells us that when all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's sons? To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David." So the Israelites went home. Here in this passage, we see that their response to the king is, "Look after your own house, David." Now, he's not David, but his grandfather is David, and he represents the house of David. He represents the descendant of David who is supposed to sit on the throne, but they look at him and they say, "You take care of your own stuff. We're done with it." And the Israelites went home after that point. What's going to happen to the kingdom? Well, I've already told you that the nation is divided, and it doesn't look well at all. Verses 19 through 20, we read that so Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. When all the Israelites heard that Jeroboam had returned, they sent and called him to the assembly and made him king over all Israel. Only the tribe of Judah remained loyal to the house of David. Now, remember, Rehoboam, he's the real king. Jeroboam, a way to memorize this that I don't even remember who told me, but a long time ago, somebody said Rehoboam is the real king. Jeroboam, he's the joker. Okay, he's the one who isn't the right king. And he is called a joker because of, well, what he did. They made him king because, well, I guess they thought he would do what they wanted him to do. The only ones who remain faithful would be Judah. And we see that tribe is the one who is going to stay faithful to the house of David. And David's descendants would also continue to reign and rule the kingdom of Judah, as it would be called. But Israel had rejected their king and made someone else king in the place. This Jeroboam, the one who wasn't the rightful king. What did he do? Well, with these two kings, you find out that later comes two calves. Yes, you ever heard the story of the golden calf? Yeah, that's that story that whenever Moses went up on the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments as well as the other commandments from God, he came back down and the people had built a golden calf and they were worshiping it. I mean, could you believe it? Whenever he is up on the mountain receiving the 10 Commandments, they're down below at the foot of the mountain breaking at least 2 or 3 of them right there. But now, did you know that in this passage right here, we find out that not only was there just one golden calf, but there's actually 2 golden calves that appear in this chapter. The calves are still causing problems for the nation of Israel. In 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 26 and 27, we read this: Jeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, they will again give their allegiance to the Lord, to their Lord Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam. He's getting a little concerned, a little paranoid, because he starts to think, what if they come back to the house of David? What if they refuse to truly accept me as king? Because after all, the people were supposed to go to the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. So if they kept having to go to the temple in like another part of the nation, Jeroboam's afraid that their allegiance will no longer remain faithful to him. What could he possibly do? Well, he's going to ask for his own advice. Verses 28 through 31, after seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. One he set up at Bethel, and the other at Dan. And this thing became a sin. The people came to worship the one at Bethel, and went as far as Dan to worship the other. Jeroboam built shrines on high places and appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levites. You look at this passage, it's not just one golden calf that he makes. He makes 2 golden calves. And he calls the people to worship those golden calves as if they were their God who delivered Israel up out of Egypt. That's almost word for word exactly what Aaron said whenever he made that golden calf. He said, look, here's your God, the one who brought you out of Egypt. Jeroboam is saying the same thing right here. And I want you to notice where these 2 golden calves are placed. We can kind of easily miss this, especially if we don't look at a map along with this, because we see that one's put in Bethel, one's put in Dan. Okay, we've probably heard of Bethel and Dan. We know that's a tribe, right? Well, there's significance about these. When you look at a map and you see where Bethel and where Dan is, there are different parts, kind of opposite ends of what this new nation of Israel would be, this new divided segment of Israel, who is going to take on the name Israel. Yeah, that gets a little confusing at this point in history, but that's what the northern tribes, they take on the name of Israel. The southern tribes take on the name of Judah, because that's the biggest tribe that remains faithful to God. But the northern tribes, the north and the south borders of that, you have one of them is Dan, one of them is Bethel. So it's anybody would be able to go to those places and be able to worship those golden calves. Now, going back to what we started at the very beginning, do you remember how I said it's a little puzzling to me why Revelation 7 lists the 12 tribes as a little different than we find anywhere else? One of those tribes that isn't mentioned is Dan. Guess what? Look here in verse 30, you find out Dan was the location of where one of those golden calves was placed. It was like the center, one of the centers of idol worship. And then the other one, Bethel. We could easily miss this, but if you kind of look it up, I just want you to take a guess. If you had to take a guess as to which tribe Bethel is located in, what would you think? Well, from what I can find, it's Ephraim. That's the other one that is missing from Revelation 7. And Revelation 7, that whole picture about the 12 tribes of Israel, they were representative of those who had full devotion to God. Well, this place of Bethel and that place of Dan, they did not have full devotion to the Lord. They were led astray. They were ones of the first ones led astray to worship these golden calves. Now it kind of makes sense why the 12 tribes of Israel looked a little different from the very beginning. Did you know that such a story even existed? This nation that is divided. It started off about this story of 2 kings. It went on about these 2 calves and this idol worship that led the entire nation astray eventually throughout time. And this continued to cause problems for the next generation and the next generation throughout the rest of time. But there's still one more thing I want us to take a look at together. And that is, after you look at the 2 kings and the 2 calves, I want us to now look at 2 commands, or rather 2 commandments that could have stopped it all. What are these 2 commandments? Well, I'll give you a hint. It's the 2 that Jesus says are the greatest. In Matthew chapter 22, Listen to this, beginning in verse 36. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. You know what Jesus did right here is he quoted Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, and Leviticus 19:18. And he said, this is what it's about. This is what all the law and the prophets are about. It's about loving the Lord your God with all of your everything and loving your neighbor as yourself. Now, I told you before that these two commandments could have stopped all of those problems before. Think about it with me. Rehoboam, that real king, remember? If he had chosen to actually love his neighbor, what advice do you think he would have listened to? And now, what about Jeroboam? If he had chosen to love God, do you think he would have been led astray by making those idols and causing all of Israel to worship them? Well, now I want you to think about this too. Whenever you think about these two commandments, we can all agree that these are great commandments to live by. But I want you to think about this, kind of the negative part of that. If we fail to live out these two commandments, what would happen in our lives? I mean, think about it. In your life specifically, in our nation, what would happen if we fail to live by these things? Well, we as Christians, we as followers of Christ, are called to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And we are called to love our neighbor as ourselves. Remember that all the law, all the prophets hang on these two commandments. That's what Jesus taught his disciples to do. That's what Jesus lived out. And he has asked us to do the same thing. Will you love the Lord your God? And will you love your neighbor as yourself?
Love so beautiful.